Well, hello and welcome to our UConn Huskies football season preview. I'm Joe Zone, sports director here at Channel 3, along with Bob Joyce, who you hear an awful lot on UConn women's radio broadcast on 97.5 Fox.
97.9.
97.9 in our market. But big voice on the pregame show all season long for UConn football. It's 2.5 hours or it's an hour and a half, but it's always a lot of UConn before those football games.
Correct.
So we're just going to talk about the season coming up. I mean, I know last year I think we were optimistic based on what had happened the previous season when they won 6 in Jim's first season, went to a bowl game. And then last year it's a fallback. So we're trying to figure out, are they that first season team, last season team, or somewhere in between?
Well, the biggest difference between 22 and 23 was the close games. They won the close games in 2022. Last year they didn't. I mean, the Utah State game, the FIU game, the USF game, all at home. Classic examples. Yeah, they lost a close game to BC up there, but it only been a 7-point game, but they were down 14 a couple of times. So I'm not sure if that really counts. But the close games difference was the reason instead of 6-6 again, 3-9. Who knows what we're going to get this year? There are so many new faces on this team, Joe, with the transfer portal, which is affecting college football and college sports in general all over the place more than it ever has. And then you have some freshmen that might make an impact on this team. We'll see. But a lot's going to depend on how well they do at home. They have 7 home games this year and an unheard of 6-game homestand, which for football is just, it never happens. Yeah, it's something new.
Go ahead.
So we'll see how it plays out. But the guys who believe most, you know, we can talk about 7-5, 6-6, 5-7 here, but the ones who have got to believe it are the guys in the Burton Family Football Complex and their coaches, led by Jim Mora.
Yeah, you say those 6 home games. By the end of October, this team's either going to be relevant or we're going to be moving on to basketball just like that. When I say we, I mean UConn Nation. So those are those 6 critical games. You said, I think it might be 37 new players on the roster, somewhere in there between the transfer portal, 25 and I think 12 high school kids. And if that isn't the biggest difference in college football, you know, it's one thing if you got a basketball team and you got to bring 1 or 2 in. When you're bringing 37 guys in and you have to evaluate them based on film and one visit, it's a crapshoot.
It is, and then you add in the traditional norm, anyone who redshirted last year into the mix. So that's a whole nother group. And I'll use an example. Jackson Harper, the kid from Simsbury who went to Avon Old Farms, he redshirted last year. He'll play special teams. He'll be a punt returner this year. So it's just that whole mosh pit of players. And then you add the new defensive coordinator, comes over from Mississippi State, and Gordon Samus, who was the offensive line coach for the first 2 years under Jim Mora. Smart guy. He's now the offensive coordinator. So you're putting all these, putting everything into the mixing bowl, starting to stir it and see how it comes out. That will be interesting to see how we get a look at that on Saturday when the Huskies play Maryland. Then they host Merrimack. You'll see that here on Channel 3. And then the Duke game. So 3 weeks in, we'll get a pretty good idea of where they're headed. And then they have to take advantage of the home schedule.
And we talk about new players. This week he named his starter. I don't know if it was a big surprise. Were you surprised by Nick Evers taking over the starting job?
No, I figured it would either be him or Joe Fignano. Yep. I mean, Fignano's got all the experience from his time at Maine, and then he started last year before he got hurt at Georgia State. But they invested a lot in Nick Evers last year to get him in the offseason through the portal. So apparently he didn't do anything to hurt his credibility as a quarterback. Now, the one downside is he's taken, maybe 2 snaps in his entire college career in 2 years.
At 2 big schools, by the way.
Yes, Oklahoma and Wisconsin. And Skylar Bell came over from Wisconsin with him, one of the wideouts, and we'll get into that in a bit. But the kid can run like a deer. We know that. He's pretty good on the run, throwing the football. But it might give them a little more flexibility in the run-pass option, the way the offense looks. And, the other 2 factors, Joe, are can they protect him? Because it's a relatively new offensive line, particularly the middle 3. And then they brought in a really big crop of wideouts that have Power 4 experience, can they get separation and be able to throw the ball downfield, which is something they have lacked severely the last couple of years.
And when they did it well, those guys decided to move on to other programs. So you had a little success there. Now you got to bring in new guys and try all over again. That's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I like what Skylar Bell can do. He's the kid from Wisconsin who came over with Nick Evers. It sounds like TJ Sheffield, the grad transfer from Purdue, certainly has some experience there. I know they're high on Shamar Porter, who's a redshirt freshman. He's 6'3". And then, of course, you have Steady Eddie, Brett Buckman, who will play the slot. And I know in talking with him and Jackson Harper, who might see some time at the slot position, learning a lot from him. You know what you're going to get from at least Buckman because we've seen him. The other guys are unknowns, although Bell had a not so much great year last year, but the previous couple of seasons before he came over, he had some success at Wisconsin. So he knows how to play against the better competition, and obviously we'll get that first test on Saturday.
Speaking of Saturday, I'm just looking at the schedule. You know, Maryland, they go to bowl games. I think they've been the last 3 seasons.
3 straight bowl wins, yes.
Predicted to win 6 games this year, but they got to play USC. I mean, they play big-time football. Oregon, Iowa.
Welcome to the new world of college sports.
Yeah, they're going to be. So you got Maryland on the road to start. That's obviously a tough a challenge for a home as a road openers you want to have as an independent. And then they come home and they got Merrimack.
Yep, that's a game they absolutely have to win. And then you go to Duke. Duke beat them up pretty good last year at the Rent, but they're a different look. I think they have a transfer quarterback from Texas who will be starting for them.
They lost their quarterback and their running back to the transfer portal.
Yeah.
So they got new guys. But looking at it, they led the ACC last year in scoring defense, so they're also tough to score on.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole thing. And here's another thing, too, Joe. I mean, we talk a little bit about the offensive line, and we haven't even touched on the running backs yet.
Right.
Victor Rosa got dinged up a little bit during camp, but he's good to go for the opener. Cam Edwards, by all accounts, had a tremendous offseason in the weight room and then through spring practice and fall practice. He's been sensational. And then they get a couple of guys through the transfer portal that we haven't talked a lot about, Mel Brown and Darrell Robinson, to help beef up the depth, because as we've seen the last couple of years, injuries have decimated the running back position. That's why Victor Rosa was forced to play as a freshman. That's why Cam Edwards was forced to play a lot more last season and really came on in the second half of the season. They need that depth at running back, and hopefully the 2 guys they brought in to help with Rosa and Edwards are able to complement that run game.
And you talk about Rosa. I mean, I love the kid, but he's not the biggest running back in college football, so he can get dinged up, a little hit here, a little hit there. So depth at that position, and I think we're all excited in the state, at least. You've got 2 Connecticut kids in that backfield, local guys basically. So I think that's something to get excited about.
You know, it's funny. One of the practices maybe 2 weeks ago, Mark Robbins was with me, and we were having this conversation. Had they ever had 2 Connecticut guys in the backfield together like this? And you got to go back to 03, 04, when they had Chris Bellamy from New Britain, Matt Lawrence, who was here for maybe a year, maybe 2 from Bloomfield. Those are the only 2 guys that I can think of that at least were in the backfield core as Connecticut guys. So, yeah, that's a pretty big deal for Connecticut football. You get Victor, who had a great career at Bristol Central, and then what Cam did downstate. Yeah, so and they're really good. I mean, talking with Jim and Gordy Samus, Victor has really improved in his pass-catching abilities, so that gives him another option out of the backfield. We saw what Cam Edwards did for a few games last year, particularly made a really nice catch in the USF game, the game that I did on the radio. So, yeah, they've got some more options other than the wideouts. And then the tight end position is all new, too. I mean, you mentioned in passing Justin Jolie leaving to go to NC State. That leaves a big hole at the tight end spot. So they've got a couple of veterans, but then they've got a couple of young guys, too. So all these pieces, parts, you got to put together and see how they all play out and what the chemistry is going to be like. That's obviously the biggest question going into this season.
Let's go back down to the schedule. Florida Atlantic, they were 4-8 last season. That's a team that looks like they have a chance to beat.
Yep, Tom Herman's the head coach, who coached at Texas, and I think he was at Ohio State as a coordinator, I think, if I remember right. So that's a game they could win,
Now we're talking about this home streak. Buffalo,
out of the
that's here. By the way, that's a day that they're honoring Connecticut Coaches Association Hall of Fame going to have their honorees on the field for the game that
Very
day
nice.
in between. Thank you very much. Nice to go in.
Are you going in?
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, they have 9 coaches and 1 media guy. They're going alphabetically. It must be my turn.
Nice.
But no, it's something to, it's.
So we've had a good year of awards, being Co-State Sportscaster of the Year, and you're in the Hall of Fame. Yeah.
I'm going Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And,
So good stuff.
But they do that in between periods at the Buffalo game. That's a noon start.
Yep.
And then after that, Temple.
Temple
MAC.
has just gotten lost out of the AAC. Yeah, I feel bad for that program. Football, they've traditionally been pretty good, but I know they've struggled on some hard times. And now with the way the AAC looks, they're a big question mark. That's a winnable game for sure.
Do you remember Temple in the days of Eastern football? Temple was right up there with West Virginia.
Paul Palmer.
Penn State.
Was
Rutgers,
a fabulous running back.
Those were good
Sure
Temple
they were.
teams.
And UConn's had some really good battles with them in the past.
Wake Forest. That's a
3 ACC teams on the schedule. That's a good pickup for UConn getting Wake, and they flip-flopped that. That was originally supposed to be a road game when the schedules first were made out, but then they flip-flopped. So the Huskies are going to Wake next season.
So we're right in the middle of this stretch. They've got Rice after that.
Team they beat last season.
6-7, 38.
Fun game
31.
down there.
Yeah, they won that one. Georgia State, which is now going to be a Friday night, was supposed to be a Saturday game.
Right.
Moved it to Friday
It's
night.
senior night. Yeah.
With our Friday night football show, that's going to be a battle. But they beat UConn last year at that.
They did. That was
35-14.
game 2. That was they put a pretty good hurting down in Atlanta on the Huskies. Yes. So and that's the game Joe Fagnano got hurt. Yes.
And that's the end of the home slate because then it's UAB,
which is coached
they got a new
by
coach, Fran Brown,
new former quarterback.
Oh, that's Syracuse. You're right. 4-8 last season.
UAB.
Yeah.
Trent Dilfer is the coach down there.
Okay, so Dilfer. They're real good at home.
Yep.
4-2 last year.
New stadium down at UAB they play in, and then we go to the Dome.
They have a
play
new
the
coach.
Orange, and supposedly they're supposed to be pretty good this year. So we'll see how that plays out.
They
and then
are
UMass.
talking big time up there. Like this could be a turn season where they got Fran Brown is the new coach up at Syracuse.
Right.
And then, as you say, UMass to wrap it up there.
And UMass will have played Georgia the week before.
Oh boy. So when I look at that schedule, I see, if there's 5 wins in there, there's 6 wins, depending on how things roll out.
I think they need to go at least 5-2 at home to have any chance of getting to a bowl game.
Right.
2 years ago, they were 5-1 at home.
Yep.
When they won all the close games. That's the difference. You've got to be able to execute down the stretch and finish games, which they didn't do last year. They did the year before. Just find a way to win. Get that resume improved. And they've got to stay healthy, too.
Well, remember the big issue last year? One of them was the nil. And Coach Morris saying, I need $1 million a year to compete with these other schools. He told us this week he thinks they're in the hunt now for some of the players they want, that they've got some resources. That the word is pay these guys, so they thinks he's getting some players that he needs to compete at this level.
Well, they made a nice, they invested a lot in Nick Evers. They brought in, as you mentioned, as we've talked about already, some wideouts with, some experience at the Power 4 level now. He feels like they have some depth at offensive line that they haven't had in years past. The center, I believe, went to Syracuse, is coming here from the Orange. Defensively, we haven't even talked about the defense yet, Joe. They're good up front. I mean, that's all homegrown with Gordine, Stafford, and Yates to lead the way with some depth. Linebacker will be interesting to see how that plays out because you don't replace Jackson Mitchell like that, who's going to step up, or whom. It's a whole different look. And then you've got the secondary, Ronte Jones now, not Durante. Ronte is now a senior now. He was a Edsel recruit. Malik Dixon-Williams, those are the 2 mainstays, along with Millette and Cross. But then they bring in some other guys from the transfer portal, both at linebacker and in the secondary. And you have to see how this plays out. And then with the new setup, they say it's a 3-3-5, but Coach Brock told us it's more of a 4-2-5, where the third linebacker is more of a hybrid guy, somewhere in the 250 mark, that will rush off the edge. Jelani Stafford is very excited about this new setup. He feels like he's going to be able to get let loose and really get after it. But now that they know who he is, how's he going to deal with getting double teamed maybe? So that means other guys have to step up, whether it be Yates, Gordine, or whoever comes off the bench, putting the pressure on the quarterback, stopping the run. I mean, the defense hasn't exactly been outstanding the last few years. 22 was good enough to get them to a bowl game, but getting pressure on the quarterback and getting turnovers has been an issue in recent years, and that has to change. And if it does change, it makes life a whole lot easier on the offense.
Right. Before we wrap this segment, Big 12 talk. You've heard some of the talk. What do you think?
Well, look, to compete financially with the big boys of college sports, I think it has to happen, whether the fan base wants it to. Now, look, I get it. They love, particularly for basketball. That's why they went back to the Big East, to save the brand of men's basketball. But the big picture of college sports, and there's no guarantee that the ACC is going to be around in a few years. That could break apart because, Florida State and Clemson want out. Could there be a trickle-down effect and they all go to the Big 12? I mean, I've seen some things where possibly the Big 12 might suck in some of those ACC teams, and UConn has to be a part of that. I know the Big East just got a new TV deal to get the schools more money, but you can't compete with the other four conferences,
Football
big
money.
picture. Yeah. Unfortunately, and we say it all the time, like it or not, football drives the bus in college sports. That's the fact. So you have to go where the money is, and no matter how good or painful it is for some programs, you have to do it. I think personally, it will certainly benefit. I mean, men's basketball will be fine if you're playing Kansas, and even like Cincinnati is already in the league, and West Virginia. Those are teams that UConn's played before. Yep. Baseball would benefit humongously from the Big 12. That's certainly a big step up. And obviously the sport that I cover, women's basketball, that's also a major step up.
Yeah, getting Baylor back again and teams like that.
Yeah.
And, even if the money was never as big of an issue as it has been, now you've got this new rule coming in where they're going to have to come up with $100 million each school to pay. I mean, this is more, just to pay athletes basically salary. So when it comes down to it, I mean, I love the Big East, but in the end, and it's funny how important football is to this. And from what I'm hearing, the reports and the sources saying football's not even coming in until 31. They have to up. I don't know if it means upgrade the facility, whether it means upgrade the program. How do you financially upgrade the program? I don't know what that means, but they're willing to take basketball right away, but wait 5 years for football?
Well, and I also saw that they might add, be able to put, UConn play 5, maybe Big 12 games leading up to that, full-fledged, kind of like what Notre Dame does with the ACC with football. Look, I mean, as far as on-campus facilities, they're as good as anybody's in the country. Incredible. If you've walked in Burton and the Shenkman.
And you drive in on campus.
They're phenomenal. The question is the rent. Yeah. Look, you and I have been here long enough to know when they were good from 2002 to 2010, 40,000 people in that place, you know how loud it gets. Yep. I mean, Friday night games, I can still remember the Baylor game here when Robert Griffin III was a freshman, how noisy it was. I remember the very first game at the Rent, the night game, the Big East game against Pittsburgh, how loud it was. Because it's down low, it's concrete, and the sound just reverberates. Yes. Remember the Michigan game in 2013, how big that was for Connecticut. And I remember talking to Frank Beckman, their radio voice, because there was talk they should move this game to Yankee Stadium or the Meadowlands or Foxborough. But he understood the importance of UConn hosting a team like Michigan at the Rent. Right. And they added 2,500 seats at the scoreboard end of the building, and how festive an atmosphere it is. It's a great atmosphere. You don't need 50, 60,000 if you're packing 40,000 and it's loud, but you've got to build up the program and get people interested in it again. Because I remember, back in those days, it wasn't hard for students to come from stores to East Hartford when all we did was win and get the bowl games and have exciting football here. We've got to, find a way to be able to do that again. And, in the Northeast, it's hard. I mean, just ask Boston College how hard it is. And they've had some pretty good teams, but then you play the higher level teams in the ACC. It doesn't always work out that way. So it's that, darned if you do, darned if you don't situation. But in this case, the way the money goes, you have to have to explore it and we'll see how it plays out. Maybe by the time we get to the first home game on the 7th, we might have a direction to see what the future's like.
Right, and you and I both know when you win, you naturally bring fans in, and not the diehard. The diehards are always coming,
Right.
at least until early November.
Yep.
But to get that fringe out there to come in, you got to win games, have people talking about it, have them on their phones all excited about the games. Winning is still the bottom line. That's why I've always said I'd rather play a mediocre schedule and go 10-2 than play Michigan and Syracuse and Clemson and go 4-7. That it worked pretty good for Brigham Young for a long time.
You know, the wild thing, and while I'm thinking of Maryland, Maryland's a classic case here. You know, they got off to a really good start last year, and then you get to the Big Ten schedule, and they have hopes of taking it to the next level. Well, now, not only have to contend with Michigan and Ohio State and Michigan State, but now you got USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. Well, hello, I mean, Washington only played the national championship game last year.
And Oregon was right there.
And Oregon was right there. And USC and UCLA, I mean, they're traditional powers.
Yep.
USC is going to get a real, first taste of what, how good they're going to be when they play LSU, I think, this weekend in the first game.
Yep.
So, it just doesn't get easier for anybody. And the SEC now with Texas and Oklahoma. Wow. Welcome to college football. It's sad for us traditionalists to see all the old conferences get blown up by all of this. I don't know how the Pac-12 was able to be so bad in organization and suddenly lose all of their schools. And even to an extent, the Big East. Yeah, TV also has something to do with this all, too. Let's not, forget them. Because I know part of this Big 12 thing is the Fox ESPN fist fight over this. I think they'll have something to say about this. Right. So it's just sad that all this has had to happen. But unfortunately, it's all about the almighty dollar.
Well, if that's what keeps the teams on the field and on television, I'm all for it.
Agreed.
All right, Bob Joyce, the little conversation as we get ready for the UConn football season. Joe Zone and Bob Joyce, we'll see you next time right here on our podcast.